Billionaire kicked pregnant wife out for cheating. 5 years later, she returns with twins. They say love and betrayal walk hand in hand, but no one truly understands the depths of heartbreak until they've tasted both. Harold Spencer was a self-made millionaire, admired by colleagues and envied by rivals. A plush mansion, fancy cars, and an unshakable prestige surrounded him until the night he discovered his beloved wife, Caroline, had been unfaithful. In a single explosive moment, Harold threw Caroline out of his life, despite her being pregnant with his child. 5 long years later, she reappeared at his doorstep with twins in tow. What could possibly bring her back? And were the children truly his? Harold Spencer's rise to wealth was anything but ordinary. Born to middle-class parents in Austin, Texas, he was the only child of Linda and Gerald Spencer, who worked tirelessly to give him the best education they could afford. As a teenager, Harold discovered an insatiable passion for entrepreneurship, buying, selling, and trading everything from baseball cards to used textbooks. By the time he was 18, he had already established a modest investment fund that put him through business school. Known around campus as the Boy Wonder, he seemed destined to achieve greatness. This relentless ambition propelled him into the world of venture capital. His early success came from carefully choosing startups, tech, biomedicine, and eco-friendly enterprises that would eventually skyrocket. By the age of 28, he was already a multimillionaire. Thrilled by his accomplishments but never satisfied, Harold pushed himself to expand his portfolio, leveraging his resources to form Spencer Global Investments. The company flourished, and Harold's reputation as a shrewd, level-headed investor only grew. It was during a high-profile charity gala in New York City that he first crossed paths with Caroline Diaz. He had just won an award for his philanthropic contributions, and she was there covering the event as a journalist for a local media outlet. Caroline was striking, long chestnut brown hair cascading over her shoulders, bright hazel eyes that lit up any room, and an aura of understated confidence that piqued his curiosity. In truth, Caroline wasn't exactly from humble beginnings. She was the daughter of Anthony Diaz, a well-known artist whose paintings sold for millions across Europe. Yet she chose a career in journalism not for money, but for a deeper purpose, to be a voice for the voiceless. She was often assigned to events that showcased the rich and powerful, but her real passion lay in stories about social justice and humanitarian issues. Still, she found herself rubbing elbows with elites far more often than she liked. Their meeting was casual at first, an interview about Harold's foundation for underprivileged children in Ghana. The moment Caroline asked her first question, he was struck by her poise and sincerity. As the interview concluded, they bantered about future philanthropic endeavors, each one increasingly captivated by the other's dedication to making the world a better place. He invited her for a private tour of one of his philanthropic projects, an invitation she accepted out of genuine curiosity. The subsequent weeks saw Harold and Caroline exchanging texts about philanthropic strategies, social reforms, and the challenges of balancing public image with personal values. Gradually, their conversations transitioned from business-like discussions to intimate confessions. Harold found himself drawn not just to Caroline's mind, but to her radiant spirit, someone who saw him not just as a wealthy investor, but as a man genuinely striving for meaningful change. Their budding romance unfolded against the backdrop of grand galas, exclusive charity events, and world travel. But in quieter moments, sharing a late-night burger in a dingy diner, or laughing over the silliest jokes at home, they discovered the authenticity in each other. Within 6 months, they were inseparable. Harold proposed in Paris, on the balcony of a luxurious suite overlooking the city lights. Caroline, teary-eyed and overwhelmed, said yes without hesitation. Little did they know that beneath the glamour, a storm of secrets and misunderstandings was already brewing, one that would threaten to topple this perfect life they had so carefully crafted. Married life for Harold and Caroline began as if scripted from a storybook. Their wedding in the English countryside was a lavish affair, attended by celebrities, business moguls, and political figures. Social media buzzed for weeks about the union of Harold Spencer, the dashing millionaire, and Caroline Diaz, the classy journalist with philanthropic aspirations. For their honeymoon, they traveled to Bali, immersing themselves in local culture and returning home more in love than ever before. Yet every paradise has a serpent lurking somewhere. In their case, the serpent took the shape of office gossip and tabloid speculation. As Harold's business empire grew, the media hunted for any hint of scandal or impropriety. A rumor soon emerged. Caroline was spending an inordinate amount of time with a mysterious man named Daniel Fletcher. Daniel, the tabloid suggested, was a wealthy media mogul who had allegedly been courting Caroline for months, even during her engagement to Harold. At first, Harold dismissed these rumors as sensational nonsense. Caroline did indeed know Daniel Fletcher through her journalism work. He was a high-profile TV producer, always on the lookout for compelling stories, philanthropic angles, and personal profiles that sold. Because Caroline had interviewed him a few times, the gossip columns painted them as secret lovers. The story made for delicious tabloid fodder. The wife of a millionaire carrying on with another millionaire. It was a dramatic headline, an easy way to garner clicks. Still, the whispers didn't die down. In fact, they intensified. Each denial seemed to fuel further speculation. Caroline, in an attempt to protect her career credibility, continued to meet with Daniel regarding potential documentary projects. She was adamant that her relationship with Daniel was purely professional, but she also recognized how easily such meetings could be misconstrued. The tension seeped into Harold and Caroline's relationship, forming subtle fractures that grew deeper with time. Whenever Caroline's phone buzzed late at night, Harold felt a pang of dread. He tried to repress it, telling himself, "I trust my wife." But the tabloids and corporate gossip started painting an uncomfortable picture. Daniel Fletcher was known to lavish gifts on colleagues and potential partners, so when Caroline arrived home wearing a new designer scarf, supposedly a sample from a brand she was reviewing for an article, Harold felt an unease he couldn't shake. Even at Spencer Global Investments, Harold's personal assistant, Victoria Johnson, discreetly informed him that there had been calls and texts from Daniel Fletcher's office, often outside regular business hours. Harold attempted to clarify, "Perhaps it's about a story or some philanthropic documentary Caroline is pitching." Victoria only nodded, but Harold could see the concern in her eyes, as if she didn't fully believe it either. The final tipping point came when Harold discovered a series of cryptic messages on Caroline's laptop while helping her update some software. The conversation with Daniel Fletcher seemed innocuous at first, discussing project deadlines and interview schedules. Then he stumbled upon a line that froze his blood. "Thank you for last night. It meant more to me than you can ever know." Harold's mind spun with possible innocent explanations, but the seeds of doubt were firmly planted. Caroline arrived home that evening to find Harold pacing in the living room, messages displayed on her open laptop. The confrontation was immediate and intense. She insisted that Daniel's words referred to an emotional revelation he'd shared about a personal trauma. Nothing romantic, nothing illicit, but Harold wasn't convinced. He demanded to know why Caroline never mentioned this personal trauma, or even the extent of their after-hours meeting. He pressed her for details. She had none that he found satisfactory. A rift opened, fueling suspicion on Harold's side and indignation on Caroline's. In the midst of the argument, Caroline revealed she was pregnant, news that would ordinarily bring joy to a loving couple. Instead, it hung in the air, overshadowed by the ugly hint of betrayal, and so the golden veneer of their perfect marriage began to crack, exposing a bedrock of doubt, frustration, and heartbreak that neither could easily repair. Harold couldn't sleep. Night after night, he replayed those cryptic messages in his mind. He knew Caroline was pregnant, and a part of him wanted to believe her wholeheartedly. Yet the older, more cynical part, shaped by years of navigating deceitful business partners, refused to let his guard down. He tried discussing the issue calmly, but each conversation devolved into an explosive argument. The moment Carolyn tried to reassure him, he'd remembered Daniel's late-night texts, and the delicate conversation turned into a verbal war. Friends and family noticed the tension. His mother, Linda, called from Austin, worried. "Son, if she's pregnant, you need to handle this carefully," Linda advised. Harold tried to brush off her concern, not wanting to elaborate on the details. Caroline's father, Anthony Diaz, also reached out, pleading with Harold to treat his daughter fairly. The entire fiasco was picking up steam in social circles, intensifying Harold's embarrassment and sense of betrayal. Then came the night of the Spencer Global Charity Ball. It was an event that Carolyn had helped organize, a black tie fundraiser for orphanages in Southeast Asia. The biggest names in business, entertainment, and politics were in attendance. Cameras flashed as Harold and Caroline made their entrance, forcing them to present a united front. Inside, the tension between them was palpable. They politely mingled with guests, posing for photos, all while wearing strained smiles. Harold spotted Daniel Fletcher across the ballroom. The sight of him made Harold's blood boil. Daniel had a smirk that hinted at confidence, maybe even smugness, as if he knew more than Harold did. Caroline caught sight of Daniel too, but kept her distance, focusing on exchanging pleasantries with donors and celebrities. As the night wore on, Daniel approached Caroline to discuss a new documentary pitch. Harold watched them from a distance, her polite laughter, the slight tilt of her head, Daniel's casual hand gestures. It gnawed at him like an unrelenting ache. Suddenly, Daniel touched Caroline's arm briefly, a gesture that seemed warm and familiar. Harold felt an uncontrollable surge of anger. Rational thought gave way to raw emotion. He marched across the room, ignoring the curious stares of onlookers and the cameras snapping away. As he reached Caroline and Daniel, he didn't mince words. "Stay away from my wife," Harold hissed, his voice low but firm. The entire ballroom seemed to hush. Caroline's face flushed red with shock and humiliation. Daniel, looking equally stunned, retorted with a calm but patronizing smile. "This is business, Harold. Nothing more." The confrontation escalated. A few guests tried to defuse the situation, but Harold was beyond reason. He unleashed months of pent-up jealousy, slinging accusations at Daniel. Furious, Daniel countered, "If you trusted Caroline, you wouldn't be making a fool of yourself right now." That sentence was the final blow to Harold's composure. He lunged forward, nearly knocking Daniel off balance. Security intervened, and the scandal was sealed in a flurry of camera flashes. Caroline, tears streaming down her face, fled the ballroom amidst whispers and gasps. The press pounced on the story. Within hours, tabloids ran headlines like "Charity Ball Chaos, Harold Spencer Loses His Cool in Jealous Rage," or "Billionaire's Wife-in-Love Triangle Scandal." When Caroline got home that night, the argument picked up with renewed fury. Harold demanded an explanation for every moment she'd spent with Daniel. She gave him the same answers as before, that their relationship was strictly professional, that any personal element was about Daniel sharing his own struggles for a potential documentary. But Harold wouldn't, or couldn't, believe her. The dinnerware crashed against walls as Harold hurled plates in his rage. In a final fit of anger, he said the words that would change both their lives. "Get out of my house. You're carrying a child, but how do I even know it's mine?" Caroline stared at him, too shocked to speak. She cradled her barely visible baby bump, tears welling in her eyes. For a moment it seemed Harold might backtrack, apologize, take it all back, but pride and anger held him firm. He repeated, "Go." And so, in the midst of a stormy night, Caroline left the Spencer mansion. She took nothing but a small suitcase and the unborn life within her. That single decision, born of misunderstanding and raw emotion, would set in motion a chain of events neither could foresee, a legacy of heartbreak, secrets, and, unexpectedly, hope. Carolyn found herself on the streets of Manhattan that night, rain pouring down, soaking her thin coat. She felt a swirl of emotions, despair, anger, fear for her unborn child, and an aching sense of betrayal. Harold had banished her without a second thought. Though she had some savings, she knew she couldn't afford the lofty rent of New York City indefinitely, especially with a baby on the way. Desperate for support, she called her closest friend, Maria Gonzalez, an investigative journalist with a fiery spirit. Maria didn't hesitate. She drove through the storm to pick up Caroline and offered her a temporary place to stay in her modest apartment in Queens. The next few weeks were a painful blur. Doctor's appointments, quiet sobs in the middle of the night, and the harsh realization that the tabloids had turned Caroline's life into their latest front-page drama. Meanwhile, Harold's life was hardly serene. The media backlash from the charity ball fiasco led to plummeting public opinion. Investors began to question his judgment. Potential deals fell through. Spencer Global Investments took a reputational hit. Nothing crippling, but enough to rattle Harold's confidence. Despite his outward bravado, he was privately tormented by guilt and doubt. Had he acted too rashly? Could Caroline have been telling the truth? But pride and anger often overshadowed any softer sentiments. Whenever regrets surfaced, Harold buried them under punishing work hours, jet-setting to Tokyo, Berlin and Dubai to secure new projects. He also built a team of private investigators, instructing them to find anything, any evidence of Caroline's alleged affair with Daniel Fletcher. For Harold, having proof would either vindicate his decision or force him to confront the possibility that he'd thrown away his marriage over a misunderstanding. The PIs produced inconclusive findings. Daniel Fletcher's phone calls and texts to Caroline were indeed frequent, but mostly business-related. Meeting times, documentary project outlines, sponsor possibilities. There were no intimate pictures, no love letters, nothing concrete to confirm an affair. Daniel, aware of Harold's suspicion, was careful. Maybe he was a master at covering his tracks, or maybe there was truly nothing to hide. The investigators couldn't say for certain. In a moment of desperation, Harold even arranged a discreet paternity test to confirm if he was indeed the father of Caroline's unborn child. However, Caroline, still reeling from their last fight, ignored his requests and changed her phone number. With no way to reach her and no physical contact, obtaining a prenatal paternity test became impossible. Life for Caroline in Queens was modest but stable. Maria's apartment was cramped, filled with stacks of research files and old newspapers, but it was warm and safe. Caroline continued to write freelance pieces for various outlets, though her reputation took a hit due to the scandal. Still, a handful of editors admired her work enough to give her assignments. She saved every penny, determined to rebuild her life. One person who unexpectedly reached out to her was Daniel Fletcher himself. He called, offering words of support and possible job leads. Caroline hesitated to accept his help, knowing it would only fan the flames of suspicion. Ultimately, she declined. She needed to prove, mostly to herself, that she could stand on her own without any man's assistance. Months passed, and her pregnancy progressed. She prayed that Harold might reach out in remorse, but no call came. Her doctor informed her that her baby was healthy, and Caroline tried to focus on that solitary beacon of hope amid the emotional wreckage. Across town, Harold was living in an eerily quiet mansion. In the evenings, after returning from his lavish office, he would wander the halls, haunted by Caroline's memory. He noticed small things, a faint trace of her perfume on the bedroom curtains, an earring she'd forgotten on a countertop, a half-finished painting she'd once started in the study. Each discovery cut him deeper than the last, reminding him of what he had lost. And yet, despite this shared sorrow, neither dared to make the first move toward reconciliation. Pride waged war against regret. Caroline worried that Harold would never believe her. Harold couldn't silence the voice in his head that said, "What if you're wrong?" The stage was set for a separation that seemed irreversible. Little did they know, destiny would soon intervene in ways neither of them could predict. 5 years, enough time for the world to change, for children to grow from infancy to school age, for fortunes to rise or fall, For Harold and Caroline, those 5 years passed in drastically different ways, but for both, they brought transformation and regret. Caroline, after giving birth, had chosen a life far from the public eye. She wanted peace for herself and her child, indeed, children, for she had discovered she was carrying twins during a routine ultrasound. The moment the doctor revealed the second heartbeat, Caroline was filled with both astonishment and apprehension. Were both babies Harold's? Despite her unwavering certainty, she knew the question would loom in Harold's mind if they ever crossed paths again. She named her twins Gabriel and Ava, honoring a family tradition on her mother's side. Leaning on Maria's help only so far, Caroline eventually secured a small but cozy 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet New Jersey suburb. She worked multiple freelance gigs, writing investigative pieces, blogging about social issues, and occasionally working as a proofreader. Balancing single motherhood with a demanding career was exhausting, but she loved her children fiercely, determined to give them a stable upbringing. The heartbreak from her past lingered, but she rarely spoke of it, focusing instead on the present. On the surface, Harold's life continued an upward trajectory. Spencer Global Investments bounced back from the scandal, mostly thanks to strategic alliances and Harold's skillful business maneuvers. He expanded his empire into new markets, forging partnerships with international conglomerates. His name graced the covers of finance magazines once again, painting him as an unstoppable titan of industry. Yet behind closed doors, Harold was anything but content. His evenings were solitary, marked by late-night drinks in an empty mansion. Occasional romantic flings flitted through his life, but none stuck around. Gossip columns tried linking him to supermodels or heiresses, but insiders knew Harold Spencer remained emotionally unavailable. His heart, once open, seemed locked behind a fortress of guilt and suspicion. He never entirely gave up on finding Caroline or confirming the paternity of her child, though he had no idea she'd had twins. But each private investigator he hired came back with minimal leads. Caroline's phone number was unlisted. She had no permanent office address as she worked freelance. She rarely posted on social media, and when she did, it was anonymous or related to her professional life. During those 5 years, Harold occasionally reached out to Maria Gonzalez, hoping she might reveal Caroline's whereabouts. Maria steadfastly refused, respecting Caroline's wishes for privacy. "She wants you out of her life, Harold," Maria once said bluntly over the phone. "Unless you're ready to believe her and fix what you broke, you need to let her be." That conversation echoed in Harold's mind for years. He saw Maria's point but couldn't bring himself to apologize for accusations he still partially believed. Every so often he'd recall the heartbreak of that night, the cryptic messages, Daniel Fletcher's smug face. Could I have been wrong? He'd wonder. But doubt, combined with anger at the humiliation he'd endured, kept him in emotional limbo. Meanwhile, Daniel Fletcher had long moved on from the scandal, diving deeper into producing documentaries that garnered international acclaim. He eventually settled down with a business analyst from London, which should have been a clear indication that Caroline hadn't been his secret lover. But Harold's pride never allowed him to reach out to Daniel or seek closure. And so, 5 years passed in a stalemate of silence and isolation. Harold maintained a lavish lifestyle, overshadowed by personal emptiness. Caroline lived modestly, but felt the warmth of family every day with Gabriel and Ava. Neither realized how drastically their lives would intersect again, or that fate had been quietly working to bring them face to face with the truth and each other. One crisp autumn morning, Harold was seated in his office, poring over a contract for a major venture in renewable energy. The skyline of Manhattan stretched before him through floor-to-ceiling windows, a testament to his success. Despite the external trappings of triumph, he felt a familiar emptiness gnawing at him. That's when his intercom buzzed. Victoria Johnson, his long-serving assistant, spoke in a hushed, urgent tone. "Mr. Spencer, there's someone here to see you. She says it's personal." Harold frowned, a slight annoyance prickling him. His schedule was packed, and he wasn't expecting any personal visitors. "Send them in," he replied curtly. He rose from his desk, buttoning his tailored suit jacket out of habit. The office door swung open to reveal Caroline. Older, yes, but still radiantly beautiful, her hazel eyes now bearing a quiet resolve. At her side were two children, a boy and a girl, each clutching one of her hands. They looked around 6 years old. Harold's heart hammered in his chest. He could only stare, speechless, as memories flooded back. Anger, guilt, longing, confusion, emotions collided in him with dizzying force. Caroline's voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "Hello, Harold. We need to talk." Gabriel and Ava, shy and curious, peered at the imposing office, the city skyline, and the stranger who was their father, though they didn't know it yet. Victoria discreetly left the room, closing the door behind her. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Harold's eyes flicked to the twins. Their features, Gabriel's nose, Ava's chin, sparked faint reminders of his own facial structure, or maybe Caroline's. He swallowed hard. Memories of his private investigators, the nights of regret, and the raw anger he once felt threatened to resurface. But there they stood, living proof that he might have been wrong. Or was he? Caroline broke the silence, guiding Gabriel and Ava to a small seating area. "Children, can you wait over there for a moment while I speak to Mr. Spencer?" she asked gently. They nodded, wandering toward the plush chairs, wide-eyed at the luxurious surroundings. When Caroline finally met Harold's gaze, the intensity of unsaid words crackled between them. She spoke first, softly. "I've come because, well, it's time you met your children." Harold felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to lash out, accuse her anew of deceit. Another part was captivated by the idea that these twins could be his flesh and blood. He exhaled slowly, forcing his voice to remain controlled. "My children," he repeated, almost in disbelief. "Why now, after all these years?" Caroline's eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. "Because they've been asking about their father, and I realized I can't keep them hidden from you. They deserve to know where they come from, and it's your right to know them too." Harold glanced again at Gabriel and Ava. Their innocent faces pulled at something deep within him. A wave of regret washed over him as he recalled the night he kicked out a pregnant Caroline. How had it come to this? Collecting himself, Harold gestured for Caroline to sit on the couch opposite his desk. He needed answers. "Before anything else, I need to know, are they truly mine?" His voice was measured, but the underlying tension was palpable. Caroline didn't flinch. "Yes, Harold, they are, and if you still doubt me, we can get a paternity test done immediately. I have nothing to hide." For a long moment he studied her, searching for any sign of deceit. But Caroline's eyes held firm. There was no guile, no hint of the defiance he once interpreted as guilt. Instead, there was exhaustion and a guarded hope. Finally, he nodded. "We'll do that," he said quietly. "But for now, can I talk to them?" Caroline hesitated, then nodded. She motioned the twins over, her hands shaking slightly. Gabriel and Ava approached, curious but somewhat timid. Harold took a deep breath, summoning a gentle tone he rarely used in the corporate world. "Hi, I'm Harold. It's nice to meet you." They blinked at him, glancing at their mother for reassurance. Ava gave a tentative smile, while Gabriel studied Harold with unwavering eyes. Caroline gently placed a hand on each of their shoulders. "Children, this is someone very important. He's your father." In that moment, Harold felt something crumble within him, pride, disbelief, self-imposed isolation. The weight of the truth was overwhelming, but in the eyes of these children, he saw a chance for redemption, for family, for love. For the first time in half a decade, Harold Spencer felt a spark of hope ignite in his battered heart. The paternity test came back positive. Harold was the father, beyond a shadow of a doubt. The day the results arrived, he locked himself in his study, staring at the printed lab report. He wasn't sure what to feel: relief, anger at himself for years of doubt, or heartbreak over all the lost time. That night he poured himself a whiskey, but the taste turned bitter in his mouth, reminding him of regret rather than solace. He set the glass aside, untouched. Meanwhile, Caroline had temporarily moved with Gabriel and Ava into a modest hotel near Times Square, an arrangement she could barely afford. Harold, upon learning this, insisted they relocate somewhere more comfortable at his expense. She refused at first, her independence flaring, but practicality won out. Eventually, Harold provided them with an apartment under a lease in Caroline's name, no strings attached. For the twins, life in Manhattan was a whirlwind of discovery. They had grown accustomed to a quieter suburban lifestyle, but the city enthralled them. Harold began spending his free time with them: museum visits, strolls through Central Park, impromptu lunches at kid-friendly restaurants. Each outing was a mix of excitement and awkwardness as Harold tried to connect with two children he barely knew. Gabriel was reserved, taking after Caroline's reflective nature. Ava was more outgoing, peppering Harold with questions about skyscrapers and airplanes. Caroline observed these father-children interactions with cautious optimism. She saw moments of genuine bonding, a shared laugh over a silly street performer, or a tender moment when Harold caught Ava's hand to guide her across a busy intersection. Yet an unspoken tension remained between Harold and Caroline, weighed down by history and unresolved conflict. Eventually they agreed to meet privately to discuss the past. They sat in the apartment's living room once the twins were asleep. Caroline began by recalling that tumultuous night. "I never cheated, Harold. I need you to believe me," she said, voice trembling with old hurt. Daniel Fletcher had personal struggles. He lost a family member. I was just there for him as a friend. I should have been more transparent, but I never, ever betrayed you. Harold listened, silent. He wanted to believe her, but the memory of seeing Daniel's messages still stung. "Those messages, you must realize how suspicious they looked," he said, avoiding her gaze. "It wasn't just jealousy. I felt humiliated, blindsided." Caroline's eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "You were blindsided. I was the one you threw out into the streets while pregnant. You never gave me a chance to prove my innocence. And for what? Because you were worried about what the tabloids said? Because Daniel's presence threatened your pride?" The words cut Harold deeply, but he knew she was right. His temper had overshadowed any reason that night. "I can't take back the past. I was overwhelmed by the tabloids, the gossip, even my own insecurities," he admitted, the words tumbling out in a rare display of vulnerability. "I handled it like a fool." Caroline sighed, tears brimming in her eyes. "I just wish you'd trusted me, or at least let me defend myself properly, but you chose to believe rumors and illusions over me." Harold reached out tentatively, placing a hand over hers. She stiffened at first, but didn't pull away. "Caroline, I'm sorry," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I destroyed our family over an assumption, and in doing so, I lost the chance to watch my children grow. If I could reverse it, I would." A heavy silence draped the room. Caroline squeezed his hand back, not quite forgiveness, but perhaps the first step toward it. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted. "We've both changed, and the twins, they're our priority now." Harold nodded. "We'll figure it out," he said softly. "I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." For the first time in 5 years, both dared to hope that a bridge could be built between them, though neither knew if it would lead to friendship, co-parenting, or something more. But what they did know was that the children needed both of them, and for their sake, they had to confront the truth and find a path forward. Whether that path lay in forgiveness, reconciliation, or a second chance at love was yet to be determined. A few weeks later, Caroline found a stark white envelope in her mailbox, sent from an unknown address in Beverly Hills. Inside was a typed letter accompanied by photographs that would rattle her deeply. The letter claimed to reveal the real truth behind Daniel Fletcher's alleged affair with her, and the photographs included pictures of Daniel with another woman, dates stamped a few weeks before Harold kicked her out. The letter concluded with a cryptic warning: "Find Daniel Fletcher if you want closure." Caroline was puzzled. Why, after all these years, was someone sending her this? She had moved on from Daniel Fletcher, determined never to revisit the drama that cost her so much. Yet curiosity gnawed at her. If these photos proved Daniel had been romantically involved elsewhere during that tumultuous time, it might reinforce her innocence. But who was behind this envelope? A disgruntled tabloid reporter, a friend of Daniel's, or someone seeking to stir up trouble? She debated telling Harold about it, worried it might rekindle his suspicions or cause more stress. In the end, she couldn't keep it hidden. One evening, after the twins had gone to sleep, she laid the photographs and the letter on Harold's desk. He examined them with a mixture of surprise and apprehension. "This is strange," Harold muttered, flipping through the images. "Daniel Fletcher and... who is this woman?" The pictures were somewhat grainy, but it was clear Daniel was intimately close to a dark-haired woman in upscale restaurants and private events. The timestamps placed them mere days before the scandal that rocked Harold and Caroline's marriage. Caroline shrugged. "I don't know. I'm not sure I even care, but whoever sent this letter claims we need to talk to Daniel for closure." Harold's lips pressed into a thin line. The old tension tightened in his chest. "After all this time, I'm not sure it's a good idea. It might just stir up old wounds." Yet something about the letter nagged at him. It was too orchestrated, too targeted to be random. Against better judgment, Harold made a few phone calls to connections in the media world. Within days, he had an address for Daniel Fletcher, now living in Los Angeles. He hesitated to share it with Caroline, uncertain if she really wanted to confront the past head-on, but Caroline, resolute, insisted. A week later, they found themselves boarding a flight to Los Angeles, the twins staying behind with Maria. The trip was awkward. It was the first time they'd traveled together in years. Seated side by side in first class, they tried to make small talk, but the looming confrontation with Daniel overshadowed any chance at genuine relaxation. They arrived at a gated Mediterranean-style villa in the Hollywood Hills. Daniel answered the door himself, looking visibly startled to see both Harold and Caroline. At first, he tried to brush them off, but when Caroline mentioned the photographs and letter, a flicker of concern crossed Daniel's face. He led them to a chic living room with glass walls overlooking the city. "What is this about?" Daniel asked, an edge to his voice. "I thought we put this nonsense behind us." Caroline set the envelope on the coffee table. "Someone sent me these pictures of you with another woman, dated just before Harold threw me out. The letter suggests you hold the key to clearing my name." Daniel glanced at the images, swallowing hard. Slowly, he ran a hand through his neatly styled hair. I know who sent this," he said quietly, eyes darting to Harold, "and it's more complicated than you think. I never meant to involve Caroline in my personal life, but—" He hesitated, struggling to find the right words. Harold's patience wore thin. "Just spit it out, Daniel. We've lost 5 years. We deserve the truth." Exhaling sharply, Daniel confessed, "I was never romantically involved with Caroline. The reason I sent those late-night messages was because I was losing my mother to cancer. I needed emotional support. Caroline was just a friend who understood. She'd covered medical stories before, and I found solace in her empathy. The woman in these photos is Natasha Graham, a film producer I'd been seeing. We had to keep it under wraps because she was married at the time to someone very influential in Hollywood." Caroline's brow furrowed. "So why the secrecy about your personal issues? Why not publicly clear my name?" Daniel avoided eye contact. "I couldn't. My situation with Natasha was precarious. If I admitted to being with someone else, it could have dragged her into a scandal. Besides, the tabloids jumped on the story about you and me. I tried to deny it, but my silence gave them more material. I'm sorry. Harold felt his blood pressure spike, recalling the tabloid's vicious rumors. So you let Caroline take the fall. You let me believe she cheated on me, all to protect your own affair. Daniel flinched. Yes, and I'm sorry. But I never expected you'd throw her out, Harold. I thought you'd trust her more than you trusted the tabloids. The irony sliced through the room like a blade. Daniel's secret relationship had fueled the rumors that destroyed Harold and Caroline's marriage. Harold's own insecurities had sealed their fate, and now a single envelope had brought them to the truth, years too late. Caroline turned away, tears in her eyes. The revelations felt like both a vindication and a cruel confirmation of how a cascade of misunderstandings could shatter lives. Harold clenched his fists, grappling with anger and guilt so enormous it nearly overwhelmed him. In a trembling voice, Caroline asked, "But who sent the letter, and why?" Daniel sighed, a haunted look in his eyes. "That would be Natasha. She regrets everything that happened. We're no longer together, but she found out about your situation and wanted to make amends. She hoped the truth might give you both some closure." Silence hung in the air. Caroline's tears fell silently, while Harold stared at the floor, consumed by remorse. The twist they'd just uncovered could set them free, or break them all over again, because knowing the truth was one thing, but accepting the consequences of it was another matter entirely. That night, Harold and Caroline returned to their hotel in a daze. The Los Angeles skyline glittered beyond the window, but neither took any notice. Daniel's confession had peeled away years of suspicion, turning the narrative of betrayal on its head. Harold sat on the edge of the bed, his face buried in his hands. "I can't believe I did this to us," he murmured. "I ruined our family because I jumped to conclusions." Caroline sat beside him, maintaining a careful distance. "We both made mistakes," she said quietly, though her voice wavered with emotion. "I should have told you more about Daniel's personal troubles. I didn't realize how out of control your suspicions had become." In the hush of the hotel room, they talked for hours. Caroline recounted how she had struggled alone, pregnant and frightened, living in the shadow of a scandal. Harold admitted the depth of his regret, how he'd hired investigators out of desperation, and how he buried himself in work to escape the guilt. Eventually, exhaustion caught up to them. Caroline retreated to her own room, leaving Harold to wrestle with his remorse. The next morning they flew back to New York, each weighed down by the question, what happens now? Back in Manhattan, their focus shifted to Gabriel and Ava. Harold spent more time with the twins, reading bedtime stories and helping with homework. He marveled at how quickly they'd adapted to life in the city. One evening, he noticed a crayon drawing taped to the wall, 4 stick figures labeled Mommy, Ava, Gabriel, and Daddy. The simple image stirred something profound in Harold. He realized that despite the pain and years lost, they had a chance now, a chance to forge a real family. However, rebuilding trust with Caroline was an entirely different matter. While she appreciated Harold's sincerity and willingness to spend time with the twins, she struggled to let him back into her heart. Memories of being thrown out, the humiliations she endured, and the difficulty of single motherhood still haunted her. She once confided to Maria, "I can forgive him for the sake of the children, but I don't know if I can ever forget." Maria, for her part, advocated for caution. "Don't rush into anything," she warned. "Make sure he's truly changed, not just ridden by guilt." Caroline nodded, reflecting on how both her life and Harold's had shifted dramatically in 5 years. Unexpectedly, an opportunity for healing arose in a philanthropic project. Caroline was offered a significant contract by a non-profit organization to create a documentary highlighting low-income communities' struggles in the outskirts of New Jersey. It involved interviews, fieldwork, and liaison with potential sponsors, an area where Harold's philanthropic background could be invaluable. Initially hesitant, Caroline eventually asked Harold if he would collaborate. He agreed without hesitation, seeing this as a chance to do something meaningful and to show Caroline that he supported her professional ambitions. They spent weeks visiting underprivileged neighborhoods, meeting with community leaders, and filming interviews. Caroline led the storytelling. Harold provided resources and contacts. Their shared passion for helping others began to rekindle the old admiration they once held for each other. During those weeks, they found themselves laughing over small things, the warmth of a friendly local family, the hilarious antics of children hamming it up for the camera. It felt reminiscent of their early days, before wealth, pride, and rumors came crashing down on them. One late afternoon, as they drove back from a particularly uplifting interview, Caroline turned to Harold, her face bathed in the golden sunset. "I still don't know what we are," she said, voice trembling with vulnerability. "But this project, it's reminded me of why I fell in love with you in the first place." Harold's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Caroline, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but if there's even the slightest chance we can be a family again, I'll dedicate my life to earning it." She looked away, eyes moist, but a faint smile on her lips. "Let's take it one day at a time," she whispered. And so they did. One conversation, one memory, one small moment of cooperation at a time, tiptoeing on the fragile bridge of second chances. Whether it would hold or collapse remained uncertain, but for now it was enough that they were both willing to try. Just when it seemed like Harold and Caroline were inching toward a new beginning, a final challenge emerged, this time threatening not just their relationship, but their very safety. After completing the non-profit documentary, Caroline submitted it for broadcast on a reputable network. The film's raw depiction of poverty in affluent suburbs caused a stir. It tackled issues of corruption, systemic neglect, and corporate profiteering in ways that garnered both praise and backlash. Unbeknownst to Caroline, one of the corporate entities implicated in the documentary was a powerful real estate development firm, Redwood Gable, with deep political connections. Their unscrupulous practices in displacing low-income families had been called out in Caroline's interviews. Angered executives at Redwood Gable began pushing back with legal threats. One evening, Harold received a phone call from an unidentified number, a warning to withdraw the documentary from airing or face dire consequences. Harold, protective instincts kicking in, immediately informed Caroline, "You can't let them bully you," she insisted, voice trembling with both resolve and fear. "The truth needs to come out." Harold agreed wholeheartedly, but worried for her safety and that of the twins. As the documentary's broadcast date approached, the intimidation escalated. Anonymous letters arrived at Caroline's apartment, threatening harm if she proceeded. Harold hired additional security, refusing to let the twins out of his sight without bodyguards. The entire ordeal served as a stark reminder of how precarious speaking truth to power could be. Despite the threats, Caroline and Harold stood firm. The documentary aired on schedule, receiving critical acclaim. Public outrage against Redwood Gable erupted, forcing an official investigation. In a bold move, Harold used Spencer Global Investments resources to fund legal assistance for families harmed by Redwood Gable. The synergy of Caroline's journalism and Harold's financial clout proved unstoppable. Redwood Gable soon found themselves entangled in lawsuits, hemorrhaging money and public support. In the midst of this storm, something unexpected happened. Caroline and Harold grew closer than ever. Their nights were filled not with arguments, but with hushed whispers about strategies to protect the children and ensure justice for the communities they'd served. Holding each other in the quiet darkness, they discovered a renewed tenderness, a mutual reliance that hadn't existed even in their honeymoon phase. One late night, after tucking Gabriel and Ava into bed, Harold found Caroline sitting in the living room, staring out at the city lights. He approached her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. She leaned into him, and in that silent moment, they both realized how far they'd come. From estranged spouses living worlds apart to partners bound by courage and purpose. Caroline broke the silence. "I'm afraid of what else Redwood Gable might do, but I also feel Strong, like I finally have my voice back, and you're by my side now. Harold kissed her temple softly. I made a colossal mistake once. I won't make it again. Whatever happens, we face it together. The sincerity in his voice banished the last vestiges of doubt. They spent that night talking about the future, where the twins would go to school, how they might merge their lives without pressuring the children. Conversations meandered to broader dreams, philanthropic ventures, perhaps even starting a new company together focused on ethical development. For the first time in years, they imagined a shared future filled with possibilities rather than regrets. In the following weeks, Redwood Gable's case spiraled beyond control, culminating in a series of indictments for fraud and corruption. The documentary gained national traction, shining a spotlight on injustices that many had ignored. Caroline was lauded for her fearless journalism. Harold received commendations for his philanthropic interventions. And through it all, the bond between them solidified. They still navigated the uncharted waters of rekindling love after profound heartbreak, but each step felt more natural than the last. The final test had come, not in the form of infidelity rumors, but in the threat of real danger. In the crucible of adversity, they found each other again. Several months later, life settled into a new normal. Gabriel and Ava, now 6 years old, had adjusted well to their dual routine. Days split between school, time at Caroline's apartment, and weekends at Harold's mansion that was slowly becoming a second home for them. The scandal with Redwood Gable was old news, replaced by uplifting coverage of Harold's and Caroline's joint philanthropic undertakings. One weekend, Harold decided to surprise Caroline and the twins with a trip to the English countryside, the same place where they had once said their wedding vows. The idea both thrilled and unnerved Caroline. Memories of the seemingly perfect wedding day, overshadowed by the heartbreak that followed, flashed in her mind. But she agreed, sensing that perhaps this was an opportunity for closure, and maybe a fresh start. They arrived at a quaint estate nestled amid rolling hills, far from the hustle of big cities. The stone walls, ivy-covered arches, and blooming lavender fields reminded Caroline of the past. The twins ran around, squealing in delight at the open space and vibrant flowers. Harold watched them, a gentle smile on his face. That evening, the four of them enjoyed a candlelit dinner under the stars. A violinist played softly in the corner. After the main course, Gabriel and Ava scampered off to chase fireflies, leaving Harold and Caroline alone. The flickering candlelight illuminated Caroline's face, and Harold felt the same awe he'd experienced when he first met her. As if on cue, the violinist switched to a melody reminiscent of their wedding waltz. Caroline's eyes brimmed with emotion. Harold stood, extending a hand. "May I have this dance?" She hesitated only for a moment before taking it. They swayed gently, the world around them fading into the soft glow of memories and renewed affection. Midway through the dance, Harold paused. He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. Caroline's heart fluttered. He opened it to reveal a ring, a simple yet elegant piece with a single diamond. "Caroline," he began, voice quivering with vulnerability, "I know I can't erase the past, but I want you to know that I've changed. I love you, and I want nothing more than to spend the rest of my life making up for the hurt I caused. Will you give us, another chance?" Tears blurred Caroline's vision. Every scar on her heart felt like it was healing in that single moment. She remembered the nights she cried alone, the anger she harbored, the walls she built around her heart. But she also recalled the warmth in his eyes as he read stories to their children, the devotion he showed in supporting her documentary, and the unwavering resolve he displayed in protecting their family from corporate threats. "Yes," she whispered, voice trembling. "Yes, Harold, I will." They embraced, the violinist's melody soaring into the night sky, carrying with it the echoes of a love that had been lost and found anew. From a distance, Gabriel and Ava watched, unsure why their mother and father were hugging beneath the starlight, but sensing something monumental was happening. They giggled in tandem, sprinting over to join in, turning the dance into a family embrace. The ring sparkled in the moonlight, a symbol not of past riches or societal status, but of a promise to cherish and protect what truly mattered: love, family, and the future they would build together. In that moment, the millionaire who once kicked his pregnant wife out for cheating, only to discover she never had, felt a peace he hadn't known in years. Caroline closed her eyes, leaning her head against Harold's chest, feeling his heartbeat align with hers. The path had been fraught with betrayal, heartbreak, and danger, but they had traversed it, hand in hand. Now, as they looked upon their children's bright, smiling faces, they finally understood what it meant to be whole again. And so ends the tumultuous journey of Harold and Caroline, two souls once torn apart by suspicion and circumstance, ultimately reunited by truth, resilience, and the simple yet powerful bond of family. From the shocking accusation that led to Caroline's devastating exile while pregnant, to the unlikely reunion 5 years later with twins in tow, their story reminds us that love can survive even the deepest wounds if we dare to seek understanding and offer forgiveness. Through danger, heartbreak, and redemption, Harold and Caroline found a way back to each other and discovered that their family, once broken, could be made whole again. If you were moved by their extraordinary tale of loss, courage, and second chances, please like this video, share it with others who might need hope, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring real-life stories and romantic dramas. Thank you for watching, and remember, it's never too late for a second chance at love.